All right, so today we're talking about Japanese religion and art. Again, you guys can work through the PowerPoint as I go along and talk about this. Really just, follow along, try to understand, and answer the questions as you go. So, Japanese religion, what does that mean? Religion, we've talked about it before. Religions are uh, basically beliefs and practices that people have about things that you can't really see, beliefs about gods or heaven and things like that. And then certain practices that go along with them, like going to church or praying or those kinds of things. And then we're going to talk about Japanese art forms. So we're going to talk about not normal things that you would think of, like drawing or painting, but more things that are specific to Japanese culture. So first, let's talk about Japanese religion. Um, so the first religion we're going to talk about is Shintoism or Shinto. Shintoism is the oldest religion in Japan. It basically came into existence at a similar time that Japan came into existence. The first people that lived there were Shinto. So it is roughly 2,000 years old. It's an old religion and it is part of the culture of Japan. And if you visit Japan, you're going to see signs of Shintoism everywhere you go. The word Shinto means the way of the gods. And if you've been to, a typical type of church in the United States or, and you have this idea of, God is like this deity that's far, this big gray bearded person in the sky, or the idea that gods are, people with, or not people, but beings with personalities. It's a little bit different way to think about the word God. So I don't want you to get focused on the word gods. Um, Unlike other religions that we've talked about, like Christianity or Islam, there was no founder of the religion. It wasn't like one person said one day, I'm going to make Shintoism and it will be this religion. Here's the book, like the Bible, that guides Shintoism. Here are certain rules about what it means to be a follower of Shintoism. There is no like one set rule or one set founder. It's kind of a religion that just kind of sprang up that happened just naturally. And so those are the few big things that you need to understand about Shintoism to start. So this picture on the right hand side here is of it's called a torii, and we'll talk about it in a little bit. And it's a shrine. Well, it's actually the entrance to a shrine, and you'll see these all over the countryside of Japan. So, what's the point of the Shinto religion? Why do people observe this religion? Why do people believe it or use it, or what's the point? So the Shinto is centered around the idea that there are these things called kami, and kami is basically describing these invisible spirits that inhabit or live in everyday objects like rocks and trees. So rocks and trees, someone who doesn't believe in a religion like this might just look at a rock or tree and just see an object. Maybe a tree, you at least, see it as something that's living, but doesn't really have anything inside of it like consciousness, or like it's not alive. It's not alive in the same way that humans are alive. But in Shintoism, they believe that after people die, they become kami, and then they go and basically live in these objects. And that's the idea. That's the central idea of the religion, is that there are certain objects that have spiritual things living inside of them. And these things guide or help people to live their lives. So the main place where people encounter or interact with these spirits or kami are through shrines. So on the right-hand side, we have a picture of a shrine. This is a personal shrine that's in someone's home. And people visit shrines because they believe that after people die, they go, they live in objects. And in particular, people believe that their ancestors or their, great grandparents or their grandparents live in these shrines. And so they basically pay them a visit because there are these evil spirits that exist in the world. And these evil spirits, their whole point of their existence is to hurt you. And so you can counteract these evil spirits, though, if you visit your shrine or your ancestors and pray for good luck. So they basically pray for the good spirits, the kami, to ward off these evil spirits that would do them harm. And so that's the basic idea of Shintoism and how it works and why people follow these practices. It comes from a belief that there are spirits in the world and there are good and bad spirits, and you need to interact with the good spirits in order to live a life free of evil influences. Here's basically a picture of a few different kinds of shrines. We'll talk about them. So we already talked about the torii in the top right left-hand corner, the one that looks like it's got the two pillars with the little roof on it. And basically, when you see a torii, that's marking the entrance to a shrine. And so when you see one of these, you know you're about to enter a shrine. The two little dogs in the center, these are dogs or lions. These are called komanu. I'm probably not pronouncing that right. And again, these are found in the entrances to a shrine. So if you're entering a shrine, you'll see these two dogs kind of as basically the guardians to the entrance. Okay, now let's go down to the little thing. It's got some sticks across it. It's right here with the little antlers. This is a purification trough. And basically what you do is you approach this trough and then you wash your hands in the little pool that's at the bottom here. And that's supposed to keep your body clean as you enter the shrine. Up here in the top right-hand corner, we have a main and offering hall. Basically, these are chambers that contain a shrine's sacred object. So these sacred objects might be a talisman, they might be many different things. And the point of them is to basically a place to hold and keep these sacred objects. Down here below on the right-hand side is a stage. So many of the dances that are associated with Shintoism are performed on these stages. Oops. Down here on the left quarter is called the ima. And basically what people do is people write their wishes on wooden plates and they leave them on the shrine in the hope that kami will come and fulfill these wishes. Two more. This one right here, this is called a omikuji. And basically these are fortune-telling paper slips, and they're found at shrines. They contain predictions basically like you would get in a fortune cookie. And if you tie a piece of paper around the tree with the fortune on it, good fortune will come true and the bad fortune will not. And then finally on the right-hand side here we have the shimenawa, shimenawa. Shimenawa is a straw rope with a white zigzag paper strips, and it basically is marking the boundary to a shrine. So it's basically like something's roped off because it's sacred. So these are examples of the different kinds of shrines and different tools that people have in order to practice their religion. The other main religion in Japan is Japanese Buddhism. So we're going to spend a little bit less time on this because we'll cover Buddhism. We've covered Buddhism in India, and we've covered it when we talked about China, so we've covered it a lot already. So Buddhism arrived in Japan in the 6th century. It came from Korea. And at first there was a lot of conflicts with Shintoism. People didn't believe that the country should have two different religions, but now both religions exist without conflict. Pretty soon the government started supporting the idea of Buddhism, and so they started building large monasteries and shrines. So this is a picture of the Buddha right here. And Buddha just means the enlightened one, so someone who has reached some spiritual truth. And so these are all across Japanese countryside are these shrines to the Buddha. The most famous structures associated with Japanese Buddhism are called pagodas. You can see on the right-hand side a picture of a pagoda. They're very beautiful. They're often painted with bright colors, and you guys can see that they're tall buildings, and what they're meant to symbolize are tall holy mountains, because the idea is that the higher you go up on a mountain, the closer you get to the spiritual realm. And so people that are up on high mountains are more spiritual than people that are lower to the ground. And so they're symbolizing these tall holy mountains. And inside of the pagoda, you can see the little doors there, is where they keep sacred objects. So these objects are important things that are associated with Japanese Buddhism. And so basically, because there's a sacred object inside, it makes the pagoda a sacred place. And so that's the basics for now of Japanese religion. So the two main religions traditional religions that came into existence in the period that we're covering in Japan were Shintoism and Japanese Buddhism. And they're both interesting religions. We can talk a lot more about them, but now we're going to move on to Japanese art. So Japanese art is, there's a lot of beautiful forms of Japanese art. I've chosen to focus on just a few for now, just to give you a picture of what it's like. The first one's calligraphy, and calligraphy basically is just an artistic form of writing. You guys can see an example on the right-hand side here. It's got some, to your, English or Spanish writing eyes, these don't look like words, and they're not words in the same sense because they don't use letters, but they're more of shapes that symbolize certain ideas. And so basically what calligraphy is a cross between painting and writing. And so people would make these little cards right here that have just a few symbols on them, and each brush stroke on the card is meant to represent some idea. So the whole thing of it, all of it combined together represents this big idea, and they're combined in a way, and it's also done with a lot of artistic skill. As you can see, the brush strokes are very intentional. And so a lot of people would put these in their homes as a form of art. Many cultures do calligraphy. There's lots of different types of calligraphy, especially, and we've talked about this before with Islam. Islam has a lot of calligraphy, artistic calligraphy, that's part of their religion as well. Probably my favorite are haikus. This is a form of Japanese poetry. Haiku is a type of poetry that emerged in the 700s in Japan. Haikus are very simple. They have to do with syllables. A syllable, remember, is basically the beats in a word. So the word everything has 3 syllables. So everything. So each syllable is kind of it's kind of a break in the word. And so a haiku basically follows a 5-7-5 syllable format. So the first line has 5 syllables, the second line has 7 syllables, and the third line has 5 syllables. And the poems are meant to compare and contrast 2 images. So if we look at the poem on the right side, everything changes, summer gives way to winter, nothing ever lasts. So you can look at this one a few different ways. You could be talking about seasons versus changes, but I think it's more comparing the idea of summer and winter, and how we think about seasons. So haikus are a very popular form of poetry. People write haikus outside of Japan now. They're a universal type of poetry, but they emerged in Japan. And you guys can see, just like the calligraphy on the slide before, the haiku is also a very structured, simple form that conveys beauty in a very simple way. Ikebana. So ikebana is a traditional form of flower arrangement. It came with Buddhism coming to Japan. And the idea, Buddhist monks would basically create these flower arrangements in their temples as a way to show the idea of beauty through simplicity. So the idea behind the flower arrangement is that there are 3 stems of flowers. You guys can see in the picture on the right-hand side, there are 3 stems, 3 basic, 3 flower stems that are in the container, and they emerge into one inside the container and then branch out to 3 different once they get outside the container. And so this is a traditional form of flower arrangement that still exists today. It's a bit more complicated today. It's turned more into just general flower arranging. But you guys can see that if you compare this to like a bouquet of flowers that you might get at Save Mart, it's much more simplistic than maybe what we're used to in terms of bouquets in the United States. Final thing we'll talk about is the tea ceremony. This is something, again, that came through the way of Buddhism coming to Japan. And originally, tea ceremonies were created to honor important guests as they came to one's house. You would have a tea ceremony waiting for someone that was of extreme importance coming to visit, and the tea ceremony would give honor to the guest that has arrived. As time went on, these tea ceremonies have gotten more and more complicated. They typically take place in small tea houses inside of a Japanese garden. And if you visit Japan today, you can actually go and watch a traditional tea ceremony happen or take place. And they're really beautiful things. You guys can see in the picture there that it's a very simple space. There's no furniture. And the focus is on the simple pieces of the tea ceremony, the bowls and the kettle. So what you guys can hopefully see through this discussion of Japanese art is that Japanese art focuses on simple beauty in a lot of ways, and that's speaks a lot to about traditional Japanese culture that's focused on simplicity and beauty in nature and then the simple things around you. So hope this has been a helpful video for you and learning about Japanese culture. Make sure you have finished the quiz that is accompanied with this, and keep up the good work while I am out of commission, and I hope to see you guys soon.